Vallo from Uncubed, and today we are in the glorious NoHo headquarters of Meetup.com, talking to Erin Dertouzos, the head of talent and culture here, and we're going to be talking about gender balance in the workplace and how companies have striven to do it, specifically Meetup. Before we do talk about that, for anyone who doesn't know about what Meetup does or is, could you just give us a sense of the company?
Of course. So Meetup is a platform for people to organize around something they're passionate about. So whether that is a hobby, whether that is activism, if they're a new parent and they want to find other new parents in their neighborhood, they create local community groups and then they actually go out and meet up in real life to do what they're passionate about.
In the last 3.5 years at least, one of the real priorities in hiring has been trying to achieve a gender parity in the hiring of both executives and entry-level positions.
Sure.
Can you tell me a little bit about, why you started this initiative and how you went about implementing it?
One of the most important pieces of having a diversity program is ensuring that leadership is bought in. And we're very, very lucky in that our executive team has always recognized the importance of diversity in thought, diversity of experience, and also recognized that there was a real problem. So if you looked at our executive team 3 or 4 years ago, it was all male and pretty much all white. And our CEO actually was one of the first ones to recognize that as a problem. And one of the challenges in building diversity is that in order to attract people who are underrepresented, they need to see people like themselves at that company in roles of leadership. So it's kind of the chicken or the egg situation. So I was brought onto the executive team. For a while I was one of the only women. Well, I was the only woman on the executive team for a while. We then hired a VP of product and she was brought onto the executive team, and now our CTO, she joined us just over a year ago, is on our executive team. And it's almost complete gender balance on the executive team. So now when women are interviewing at Meetup, they see that it's not just something that we strive for, it's something that we actually live and breathe. They see that the company is led with women at the most senior ranks.
How did you guys respond to the fact that recruiters might not be helping you bring in these candidates, or that you have to avail personal networks? How does that work?
Yeah, I love that you point out that recruiters can't find these networks. It's not just the recruiter's job. So the way that we found our current CTO, Yvette, is our CEO, Scott, flew out to California to meet with a bunch of candidates himself. And he was visiting his college roommate and chatting with them over dinner, them being his college roommate and his wife, talking about how difficult this search had been. And his college roommate's wife said, "I know the perfect candidate for you. She's the best boss I ever had." That's how we found our CTO. So when we're looking for candidates, it is just as much on leadership. It is just as much on our hiring managers to be working their networks, to be speaking at events, as it is on the recruiter. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that companies make, is putting the burden and the onus on recruiters to just be targeting women, to just be targeting people of color, because a recruiter's network is limited. And those groups of people are targeted by a ton of recruiters every day, especially in technical roles. But what will make them respond and what will pique their interest is if someone in leadership is actually trying to find a way to connect with them. And we found that that has tremendous return on investment.
So, there's the matter of simply getting talent in the door and getting them hired, but then of course there's the kind of cultural difficulties that for example, there are studies that when women speak up at meetings or are aggressive in meetings are often perceived worse than their male counterparts, something like that. How do you, even when you're able to improve gender equity in the company, how do you improve the culture so that it's not actually facing these same difficulties as anywhere else?
Right. It's that training. So interview training, because women often, and I don't mean to overly generalize, my background's in psychology, so I know I've studied a lot of this. Women tend to undersell themselves. And there's societal reasons and cultural reasons for that, dating back to how we're taught as children. They don't advocate for themselves as much during the negotiation process. So we train our interviewers how to recognize those things, how someone might undersell their part in a project if they're a woman, and how a man might be more aggressive in selling his part in a project. So we start very early on training folks on the Meetup team about how the different genders might interact and might talk and might communicate. And then we talk about biases. I had a meeting with our apps team last week where we talked about how people interview differently, and unconscious bias and how that might pop in. So these are things that people generally are afraid to talk about because it's embarrassing to talk about. People are ashamed of it, but we all have them. And the more you talk about it and open up about it, the more aware people are and the more welcome people are.
So I feel like one big takeaway for anyone who's interested in kind of improving their own company is this sense of being explicit about the challenges and the expectations that you're setting. I'm curious how successful you've been in terms of other areas where diversity is often lacking in the tech community, such as race.
Yeah, so it's a battle. I will say, when I talk about the things that we're doing, we still have a long way to go. I mean, Meetup this is one of our strategic goals for talent and culture. It's one of our largest strategic goals for 2017. We're not there yet. We still have a long way to go. 65% of our company is white. So there's, we're not reflective of New York City internally. There's a lot of challenges right now in terms of attracting people, in terms of retaining people. And right now there's a lot of anxiety for folks who are on visas. We've been working very closely with our visa attorneys and investigating, are we going to have trouble getting more visas in the upcoming weeks? That challenge aside, in terms of approaching and recruiting people of color, we are partnering closely with some schools that might not have the traditional computer programming track. We don't require 4-year degrees. We generally don't care about the Ivy Leagues because Ivy League schools tend to rely heavily on legacy students, and we find that there's a lot of bias built into who ends up graduating from those schools. So we partnered with CUNY this year for our internship program, hoping to bring in more diverse students. We partnered with a couple other schools, hoping to bring in more diverse students. So it's an ongoing challenge.
What advice would you offer to someone else, whether they're a head of talent or even just a kind of a relatively new staffer at a company, who's really interested in both changing the conversation and improving the dynamics and diversity within a company? How would they start doing that?
Sure. So the first thing I would say is speak up. We all make mistakes. There was recently an article about how, I think it was titled, How Meetup Changed His Boy Club, about the change in our leadership team from predominantly male to gender equality. And Scott, our CEO, shared how he bought the Lean In book for all of the women at the company and how that backfired within an hour because really the men needed to read it too. So we all make mistakes. And I think that if you're really passionate about equality or you're having an experience that's less than ideal, speaking up to the people who are making you feel that way, and not necessarily in a public way, but pulling them aside and letting them know, hey, when you did this, it made me feel like this, and bringing attention to it is a really great start. It's certainly not your burden to change the world, but bringing it to the attention of people is a big first step, because often people don't even realize that certain things they've done can be off-putting. I think that partnering with other companies, especially for smaller startups, I mean, a startup of 20 people often doesn't even have a talent team yet. So for leaders in that company to partner with other small startups to see if they can combine resources, to host events, to connect with other groups that are working with underprivileged youth or anything like that is a great way to help raise, opportunities, because opportunities start really young.
Erin, thank you so much for talking to us. This is really fascinating.
Of course. Thank you so much for coming in.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, guys.